I hired my best friend out of pity when he was broke, but now he's stealing my multi-million-dollar company and framing me for a crime that carries 15 years in prison. He thinks I'm just a tech guy he can replace, but he's about to learn that I built a hidden fail-safe designed to burn his entire world down. I remember the exact moment I realized my life had changed. It wasn't when the first million hit the company bank account, and it wasn't when I moved out of my cramped studio apartment into a house with windows that actually face the sun. It was the Tuesday afternoon I sat in my office looking at a spreadsheet of our quarterly growth and felt a cold, sharp pit form in my stomach. Not because of the numbers were astronomical, but because of the man sitting across from me, his feet propped up on my mahogany desk, acting like he owned the air I was breathing. His name was Julian. 5 years ago, I had hired him out of pity. We'd gone to the same university, and while I was grinding 20-hour days to build Vanguard solutions from a series of frantic sketches on cocktail napkins, Julian had been bouncing from one failed startup to another, usually leaving under a cloud of creative differences. When he showed up at my door, broke and begging for a chance, I ignored the warnings from mutual friends. I thought I was being a mentor. I thought I was being a friend. I thought I was building a team. In the beginning, Julian was helpful. He had a certain charisma that I lacked. He could talk a bird out of a tree. I made him my senior account manager, giving him a generous salary and a seat at the table. But as Vanguard grew from a 3-man operation in a garage to a powerhouse with 40 employees and a reputation for disrupting the logistics software industry, Julian changed. Or perhaps he simply stopped hiding who he really was. The first red flags were small. He'd show up at 10:30 a.m., smelling like expensive gin and entitlement, and dismiss my requests for progress reports with a wave of his hand. "Don't worry about the small stuff, Mark," he'd say, flashing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm the face of this place. I'm the one the clients love. You just stay here and play with your codes." I let it slide more often than I should have. Success makes you blind to the rot in your own foundation. We were preparing for the Aegis project, the biggest contract in the history of the company. If we landed this, Vanguard wouldn't just be successful, it would be legendary. It required precision, discretion, and a very specific set of security protocols. I gave Julian a direct order. Do not share the beta code architecture with the client until the non-disclosure agreements were finalized and my legal team had cleared the data silos. It was a standard safety measure, one that protected our intellectual property and the client's privacy. 2 days later, I found out Julian had sent the entire architecture to the client's lead developer over an unencrypted email just to prove how fast we work. When I called him into my office to confront him, I expected an apology. I expected him to realize he had jeopardized a $40 million deal and our company's integrity. Instead, he didn't even take his feet off my desk. He just looked at me with an expression of bored condescension. "I did what needed to be done, Mark," he said, picking at a loose thread on his $3,000 suit. "Your orders are just bottlenecks. You're too cautious. You're holding us back from real greatness." "Julian, you bypassed a direct security mandate," I said, my voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. "You put the entire company at risk. This isn't a suggestion. I am your boss, and that was a directive. Do you understand how close I am to firing you?" Julian finally moved. He took his feet off the desk and leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. He didn't look scared. He looked like a predator who had finally decided to stop playing with its food. "Fire me?" he chuckled, a low, guttural sound. "You can't fire me, Mark. Look around this office. Half the staff follows my lead, not yours. The clients call my cell phone when they want things done, not yours. You might have the title, but I have the influence. In fact, I think we're long past the boss and employee stage." He reached into his leather briefcase and pulled out a thick manila envelope, tossing it onto the desk. It landed with a heavy thud on top of my spreadsheets. "I've been talking to a few people," Julian continued, his voice smooth and cold. "Important people. And we all agree. Vanguard has reached its current height because of my networking and my vision. Your technical work is, Replaceable. So, here's how this is going to go. I'm not following your orders anymore. I want a formal restructuring of the company. I want a seat on the board, and I want 30% equity, effective immediately. I stared at the envelope, then back at him. You want 30% of my company? The company I built while you were sleeping on your sister's couch? The company I funded with my own life savings? Julian stood up, adjusting his cuffs. He looked down at me as if I were a particularly uninteresting insect. 30%, Mark. And honestly, you should be thanking me that I'm not asking for 50. Consider it a loyalty tax. If you don't sign those papers by Friday, I'm taking the Aegis project and the majority of your senior dev team to a new firm I've already registered. I'll leave you with the lease and the empty chairs. He walked toward the door, stopping only to look back over his shoulder. Oh, and by the way, I've already told the staff about the new direction we're taking. They're very excited about my leadership. See you tomorrow, partner. The door clicked shut, leaving me in a silence that felt like a vacuum. My heart was hammering against my ribs, a dull roar filling my ears. He wasn't just refusing an order, he was staging a coup. I looked down at the manila envelope, my hand shaking as I reached for it. But as I opened the flap to look at the predatory legal language inside, I saw something else. A small, handwritten note tucked into the corner of the documents that Julian must have missed. It wasn't a note from Julian. It was a note from my head of operations, Sarah, the one person I thought I could trust implicitly. The note was addressed to Julian, and as I read the first sentence, my world didn't just tilt, it shattered. The note was written in Sarah's elegant, slanted cursive. The paper trail for the offshore account is linked to his personal IP. He's the fall guy, Julian. By Friday, Vanguard will be ours, and Mark will be facing 15 years for embezzlement. Don't push him too hard yet. We need him to sign the equity transfer voluntarily to make the transition look legitimate to the board. The paper felt like a hot coal in my hand. Sarah. She'd been my first hire. I'd walked her through her first panic attack when we almost missed payroll in year 2. I'd given her a 6-figure bonus last Christmas because I thought she was the backbone of the company. Now, I realized she wasn't the backbone. She was the parasite that had been hollowing me out from the inside. I sat there for a long time, the shadows in my office lengthening as the sun dipped below the city skyline. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the distant hum of the server room, the heart of the company I had built, which was now being used as a weapon against me. They weren't just looking for a share of the company. They were looking to take the whole thing and leave me in a prison cell. I didn't go home that night. I stayed in the dark, my mind racing through every interaction I'd had with Sarah and Julian over the last 6 months. Every technical glitch, every missed meeting, every accounting error that Sarah had smoothed over with a smile. It was a masterpiece of corporate sabotage. The next morning, I was at my desk before the sun rose. I needed to see the damage for myself. I opened my laptop and tried to log into our secure financial portal. Access denied. Invalid credentials. A cold sweat broke out on my neck. I tried my administrative override code. Access denied. Security Protocol 4 Alpha engaged. Protocol 4 Alpha was something I had designed for a total system breach. It was supposed to be the ultimate failsafe. Only 2 people had the biometric keys to trigger it, myself and my head of operations, Sarah. She hadn't just locked me out of the bank accounts, she had locked me out of the entire company infrastructure. To the system, I was now a hostile intruder. At 9 a.m., the office began to fill. I watched through my glass walls as Julian walked in, looking like he'd just stepped off a yacht. He didn't go to his desk. He went straight to the break room, laughing loudly with a group of junior developers. They were hanging on his every word. I saw Sarah join them, placing a hand on Julian's shoulder with a familiarity that made my stomach turn. They weren't just co-conspirators. They were a team. I stepped out of my office, my voice cracking slightly. Sarah, Julian, my office, now. The break room went silent. The junior devs looked at their shoes. Sarah looked at Julian, who gave a small, mocking nod, as if he were granting me permission to speak to my own staff. Once the door was shut, I didn't waste time. I laid the note I'd found on the desk. I found this, Sarah. I know about the offshore accounts. I know about the IP spoofing. Sarah didn't flinch. She didn't even look at the note. She just sat down in the chair opposite mine and crossed her legs. "You are always too sentimental, Mark. You think business is about vision and integrity. It's not. It's about control, and right now you have none." "I'm calling the police," I said, reaching for my desk phone. "I wouldn't do that," Julian interrupted, leaning against the door frame, blocking my exit. "Because if you call the police, they're going to find the $3 million that moved from the Aegis deposit into a private account in your name last night. They're going to find the emails sent from your computer, authorizing the transfer, and they're going to find the beta code leak that you supposedly sold to our biggest competitor for a kickback." "I never did any of that," I shouted, slamming my fist on the desk. "We know that," Julian said, his voice dropping to a terrifyingly calm whisper. "But the data says you did, and in this industry, the data is the only truth that matters. Now let's talk about those papers I gave you. You sign over 30% to me and 20% to Sarah. You step down as CEO, but stay on as a consultant for a year to ensure a smooth transition. In exchange, the evidence of your embezzlement miraculously disappears during a system update." "You're asking me to hand you the keys to my life's work," I said, my heart hammering. "We're asking you to stay out of jail," Sarah corrected. "And don't bother trying to talk to the board. Julian has been taking the chairman out to golf every weekend for a month. They think you've had a mental breakdown. They're already preparing the vote to replace you." I looked from Sarah to Julian. They had covered every exit. They had turned my own employees against me, poisoned my board, and framed me for a crime that would end my life. I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated rage, but beneath it, a cold, hard diamond of resolve began to form. They thought I was just a tech guy. They thought I was a pushover because I played by the rules. "I need until Friday," I said, my voice low. "I need to review the legal implications for my personal taxes before I sign anything." Julian smirked, looking at Sarah. "See? I told you he was a pragmatist. Fine, Mark, Friday, but don't try anything. We're watching every keystroke you make. Every phone call you place is being logged. You are a prisoner in your own company." They walked out, leaving me alone in the glass cage of my office. For the next 3 hours, I sat motionless, watching the digital clock on my wall tick away. They thought they had won. They thought they had accounted for everything. But Julian had made one fatal mistake. He had called me just a tech guy. He had forgotten that I didn't just build the software Vanguard ran on. I had built the entire server architecture from the ground up, including the hidden black box server that wasn't on any company inventory. A server that only I knew existed, which recorded every single packet of data that moved through our network, regardless of administrative overrides. I reached under my desk, feeling for the small, recessed button hidden in the wood grain. I pressed it, and a hidden compartment clicked open, revealing a dusty, nondescript laptop that hadn't been touched in years. I opened the lid, the screen glowing blue in the dim light. I began to type, my fingers flying across the keys. If I could access the black box, I could prove the IP spoofing. I could prove the funds were moved by Sarah's terminal, not mine. I could take them both down. But as the progress bar for the encrypted link reached 99%, the screen suddenly flickered and turned blood red. A single line of text appeared in the center of the display, written in a font I didn't recognize. "Hello, Mark. We've been waiting for you to try this." Before I could react, the office lights cut out. Outside my glass walls, the entire floor went pitch black. Then, the fire alarms began to scream, and the overhead sprinklers erupted, drenching everything in a cold, torrential downpour. Through the haze of water and the strobe of the emergency lights, I saw the elevator doors at the end of the hall open. 4 men in tactical gear carrying federal badges stepped out into the lobby, and leading them, pointing directly at my office with a look of feigned horror, was Julian. The freezing water from the sprinklers soaked through my shirt in seconds, but I didn't move. I couldn't. I watched, paralyzed, as the 4 men in tactical gear swarmed into my office. Julian followed them, his face a mask of performative distress, shielding his eyes from the spray. "There! That's the laptop!" Julian shouted over the wail of the fire alarm. "He's trying to wipe the servers. He's destroying the evidence of the kickbacks." One of the men, a tall, block-jawed individual with federal agent emblazoned in yellow across his tactical vest, shoved me roughly against the glass wall. My head cracked against the pane, a dull explosion of pain radiating through my skull. Before I could catch my breath, my arms were wrenched behind my back, and the cold bite of steel zip ties dug into my wrists. "Mark Sterling, you're under investigation for corporate espionage, embezzlement, and violations of the National Security Act," the lead agent barked. He didn't read me my rights. He didn't show me a warrant. He just grabbed the laptop, the one that held the key to my salvation, and shoved it into a Faraday bag. Sarah appeared in the doorway, her hair damp, her expression one of heartbroken disappointment. It was the most disgusting thing I had ever seen. "Mark, why?" she whispered, her voice trembling just enough to sound convincing to anyone watching. "We would have helped you. If you were in trouble, you just had to ask. You didn't have to sell us out to the Russians." "The Russians?" I choked out, coughing as water sprayed into my mouth. "What are you talking about? I built this. You're the one stealing it." "Save it for the interrogation, Sterling," the agent said, grabbing me by the bicep and dragging me out of the office. As I was paraded through the bullpen, my employees, people I had mentored, people whose kids' names I knew, watched with a mix of horror and disgust. I saw the whispers starting. I saw the way they looked at Julian, who was now standing in the center of the room, looking like a man who had just saved the world. "Everyone, please!" Julian shouted, his voice carrying over the fading sirens as the sprinklers finally sputtered to a halt. "I know this is a shock, but Vanguard is more than one man. We are a family. We will cooperate fully with the authorities, and I promise you, we will come out of this stronger. For now, go home. We'll regroup tomorrow under my interim leadership." They led me out to a black SUV idling at the curb, its tinted windows reflecting the chaos of the street. I expected a police station. I expected a holding cell. But as the SUV pulled away from the curb, we didn't head toward the federal building downtown. We headed north, toward the industrial district, weaving through back streets where the streetlights were broken and the warehouses were hollowed-out shells of the city's past. "Where are we going?" I asked, my voice tight. "This isn't the way to the precinct." The agent in the passenger seat turned around. He wasn't wearing his sunglasses anymore. His eyes were cold, professional, and entirely devoid of the bureaucratic boredom I'd expect from a government employee. He looked like a wolf. "We're going to a secondary location for a private briefing," he said. "The Aegis project is a matter of interest to people far more powerful than the FBI, Mr. Sterling. You've become a liability, and liabilities get liquidated." My blood ran cold. Julian hadn't just framed me. He had sold me out to whoever was on the other side of the Aegis contract. This wasn't a corporate takeover anymore. This was a hit. We pulled into a cavernous, dimly lit shipping depot. The heavy iron doors rolled shut behind us with a finality that sounded like a tomb closing. They dragged me out of the car and shoved me into a chair in the middle of the empty floor beneath a single flickering halogen light. The SUV doors opened again, and a figure stepped out from the shadows. It wasn't the agents. It wasn't Julian. It was a woman in a sharp gray power suit. She looked like she belonged in a boardroom, not a slaughterhouse. She walked toward me, her heels clicking rhythmically on the concrete. She held a tablet in her hand, her thumb scrolling through what looked like a real-time feed of Vanguard servers. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice like silk over gravel. "My name is Elena Vance. I represent the primary investors of the Aegis project, or, I should say, the actual owners of the Aegis project. It seems Julian told us you were the problem. He told us you were the one holding up the final data transfer because you wanted more money." "Julian is lying," I yelled, my voice echoing off the corrugated metal walls. "He's the one who bypassed security. He's the one who leaked the architecture. I have proof. It's on that laptop." Elena signaled to the agent, who handed her the laptop. She opened it, her eyes scanning the red screen that had greeted me earlier. She frowned. "The black box server," she murmured. "Julian didn't mention this. He said you were a technical genius but a coward. He didn't say you had a backdoor that bypasses the main encryption. She looked at me, a predatory glint in her eyes. Julian and Sarah are currently at your office, signing the final equity transfers and preparing to hand over the Aegis keys to our competitors. They think we're here to kill you and dispose of the evidence. They think they've won. She leaned in close, the scent of expensive perfume mixing with the smell of damp concrete. But here's the problem, Mark. Julian is an idiot. He thinks he knows how the Aegis code works. But the beta transfer he sent was corrupted. It's useless without the master decryption key, and that key isn't in the office. It's not on the main servers. She tapped the screen of my laptop. It's in here, isn't it? Hidden inside the black box. I'm not giving you anything, I spat. Elena smiled, and it was the most terrifying thing I had ever seen. She turned the tablet around to show me a video feed. It was a grainy, high-angle shot of a suburban living room. My mother was sitting on her sofa, knitting, completely unaware of the two men standing just outside her sliding glass door. Julian wants you dead so he can play CEO, Elena said softly. I want the code. If you give it to me, I'll let you live, and I'll let your mother finish that sweater. If you don't, Julian gets his wish, and I'll find someone else to crack this laptop. It'll just take longer, and the cleanup will be messier. I looked at the screen, at my mother's peaceful face, and then at the laptop. I felt the weight of my life's work, the betrayal of my friends, and the sheer crushing injustice of it all. I'll give you the code, I whispered, but you have to do one thing for me. And what's that? Elena asked. I want to be in the room when Julian realizes he's not the one in charge. Elena laughed, a sharp, genuine sound. Deal. But Mark, don't think for a second that this makes us friends. You're still a thief in the eyes of the law. I'm just a thief with a bigger gun. She signaled the agent to uncuff me. My hands were shaking as I reached for the keyboard. I began to type the 64-character override, but as my fingers moved, I realized something that Elena hadn't. She thought the black box was just a storage unit for the decryption key. She didn't realize it was also a dead man's switch. By entering the code, I wasn't just giving her the key. I was triggering a localized EMP blast that I had rigged into the hardware years ago as a last resort security measure. It would fry every server in a 5-mile radius, including the ones at Vanguard. I hit enter. The laptop didn't unlock. Instead, the screen went black, and a low-frequency hum began to vibrate through the floor. Elena's eyes widened as her tablet flickered and died. The lights in the warehouse exploded in a shower of sparks, plunging us into total darkness. In the silence that followed, my cell phone, which they had tossed onto a nearby crate, suddenly buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. I fumbled for it in the dark, the screen illuminating my face. The EMP didn't hit the office, Mark. Julian knew you'd try it. He moved the servers an hour ago. We're at your house, and we're not alone. The darkness in the warehouse was absolute, a heavy, suffocating blanket that smelled of ozone and scorched electronics. My own heart was the only thing I could hear, a frantic, rhythmic thudding that seemed to echo off the invisible walls. The EMP had worked, but it had only blinded us. Flashlights now! Elena's voice sliced through the dark, stripped of its silk, now sharp and jagged. Beams of high-intensity LED light cut through the gloom, dancing over the crates and the dead laptop on the table. The federal agents, or whoever they actually were, had their weapons drawn, the red dots of their laser sights sweeping the room like hungry eyes. Elena snatched my phone out of my hand, her eyes scanning the text message. Her face, illuminated by the backscatter of the flashlights, was a mask of cold fury. He moved them, she hissed. He knew you had a dead man's switch. He didn't just plan for your resistance, Mark. He banked on it. He's at my house, I said, the words feeling like shards of glass in my throat. My mother, he's got her. Load up, Elena commanded her men. She grabbed me by the collar of my damp shirt, pulling me close until I could smell the metallic tang of the EMP-fried air on her breath. If Julian completes that transfer from your home IP, the digital signature will belong to you. You'll be the most wanted man on the planet, and I'll be out $500 million. If that happens, Mark, your mother will be the least of your worries." They threw me back into the SUV. The driver didn't bother with the lights as we roared out of the warehouse, the vehicle's tires screaming against the asphalt. We tore through the city, a black ghost weaving through traffic, heading toward the quiet, tree-lined suburb where I'd bought my mother a house with the very first profits from Vanguard. As we turned onto my street, my heart sank. Every house was dark, the neighborhood asleep, except for mine. My house was ablaze with light. Every window was glowing with a strange, flickering blue hue, the unmistakable strobing of high-output server racks. Julian hadn't just moved the servers, he had turned my mother's home into a makeshift data center. "Tactical entry," Elena whispered into her comms as the SUV skidded to a halt 2 houses down. "Non-lethal until the package is secured. We need the master key from Sterling, and we need the hardware intact." I didn't wait for her permission. As soon as the door unlocked, I bolted. I ran across the manicured lawns, my lungs burning, the wet grass slick under my feet. I didn't care about the guns or the Aegis project or the millions of dollars. I just saw the blue light in the window where my mother usually sat to read. I burst through the front door, expecting a struggle, expecting to be tackled. Instead, I found silence. The air inside the house was hot, 10 degrees warmer than it should have been. The hum of cooling fans was a low industrial roar that vibrated in my teeth. Cables snaked across the hardwood floors like black vines disappearing into the basement. "Mom!" I yelled, my voice cracking. "In the kitchen, Mark," a voice replied. It wasn't my mother. It was Julian. I walked into the kitchen, my hands raised instinctively. Julian was sitting at the breakfast nook, a glass of my mother's lemonade in one hand and a tablet in the other. He looked relaxed, almost bored. Sarah stood behind him, her eyes red-rimmed, clutching a tablet of her own. And in the corner, sitting in her favorite chair, was my mother. She looked terrified, her hands trembling in her lap, but she was unharmed. A small black device was taped to the back of her neck, a steady red light blinking on its side. "Don't move, Mark," Julian said, not looking up from his screen. "This little beauty is a neural interrupter. One spike in the Aegis upload speed, or one step too close, and it sends a signal that'll shut down her central nervous system faster than she can blink. It's part of the security protocols you were so fond of." "Julian, stop," I begged, my voice a hollow whisper. "You have the company. You have the money. Just let her go." "I don't have the company yet," Julian said, finally looking at me. His eyes were wide, manic, reflecting the blue glow of the monitors. "You haven't signed the equity transfer, and more importantly, you haven't given me the final share." "I gave you 30%, I screamed. "What else do you want?" "Not 30% of the stock, Mark," Julian said, standing up slowly. He walked toward me, the tablet held out like a trophy. "I want the share, the founder's share, the biometric override that's hard-coded into the Aegis core, the one that requires a retinal scan and a voice print from the creator to authorize a global deployment." He leaned in close, his breath smelling of lemons and greed. "You see, the people Elena works for, they don't just want to buy the software. They want to own the man who can control it. If I hand them the software but not the access, I'm just a middleman. But if I give them you, fully compliant, fully integrated into the new board, I'm a king." "I'll never do it," I spat. Julian smiled and tapped a button on his tablet. My mother let out a sharp, choked gasp as her body stiffened, her eyes rolling back in her head. "Stop! Okay, stop!" I lunged forward, but Sarah stepped into my path, her face a mask of cold, professional detachment. "Sign the papers, Mark," Sarah said, her voice devoid of the warmth I had trusted for years. "It's the only way this ends with everyone breathing. The Aegis isn't what you think it is. It's not just logistics. It's a predictive governance model. It controls the flow of resources, of information, of people. Julian isn't just taking your company. He's taking the future." Beyond the window, I saw the shadows of Elena's team moving through the backyard. They were in position, but they wouldn't move, not as long as my mother was a human fuse. "Fine," I said, my voice dead. "I'll authorize the scan. I'll sign the transfer. Just take the device off her." After the upload hits 100%, Julian said, pointing to the basement door. The servers are downstairs. Go on. Sarah will escort you. I'll stay here with your mother and wait for the all clear from the system. I walked toward the basement, my mind racing. I had one last card to play, a flaw in the Aegis code that I had never documented, a recursive loop that would trap the scan in a verification cycle if the voice print was delivered in a specific frequency of distress. We reached the basement. It was a forest of blinking lights and heat. My master terminal sat in the center, the screen pulsing with the Aegis logo. "Do it," Sarah commanded, her hand on her holster. I leaned into the retinal scanner. The red laser swept across my eye. Identify Sterling Mark. Status Creator. Voice authorization required, the computer chimed. I took a deep breath, prepared to trigger the loop. But before I could speak, the basement door burst open. It wasn't Elena's men. It was a man I had never seen before, dressed in a janitor's uniform from the Vanguard office building. He didn't have a gun. He had a small black remote. "The upload is compromised, Julian," the man shouted into a radio on his shoulder. "The Aegis has been rewritten from the inside. It's not uploading to the investors. It's broadcasting to the public domain." Sarah spun around, her face pale. "What? That's impossible." I looked at the screen. The progress bar wasn't blue anymore. It was bright, neon green. And below it, a line of text was scrolling in a language that wasn't English, or Russian, or any human tongue I recognized. The man in the janitor's uniform looked at me, a terrifyingly calm smile on his face. "Thank you for opening the door, Mark. We've been trying to get into this system for a very long time. Julian was a useful idiot, but you were the key." "Who are you?" I whispered. The man didn't answer. He just pressed the button on his remote. A high-pitched scream erupted from upstairs, my mother's scream. But it was followed by something even worse, the sound of Julian laughing, a sound that quickly turned into a wet, gurgling shriek. I scrambled past Sarah and the man, sprinting up the stairs, my heart in my mouth. I burst into the kitchen, prepared for blood, prepared for death. But the kitchen was empty. My mother was gone. Julian was gone. The only thing left was the black device that had been on my mother's neck, lying in a pool of what looked like shimmering liquid silver on the floor. And on the kitchen table, where the tablet had been, was a single printed sheet of paper with my company's letterhead. It was a bill for $100 billion. And at the bottom, in the space for the recipient's name, it didn't say Vanguard Solutions or Aegis Project. It said the shareholder. The liquid silver on the floor wasn't blood, and it wasn't mercury. I knelt beside it, dipping a trembling finger into the substance. It felt cold, colder than ice, and as I touched it, the liquid began to vibrate, reacting to my heat signature. This was ferrofluidic cooling from the Aegis core, but it had been pressurized to the point of structural failure. "Julian!" I screamed into the empty house. "Sarah?" No answer. Only the low, dying groan of the servers in the basement. I ignored the $100 billion bill on the table and sprinted back to the basement stairs. The janitor was gone. Sarah was gone. But the monitor on my master terminal was still active, the neon green text flickering like a terminal heartbeat. Broadcast status, 92% complete, total transparency imminent. I realized then what the janitor meant. He wasn't working for Julian or Elena. He was part of a third faction, a group that didn't want to own Aegis, but wanted to use it to burn the old world down. By broadcasting the source code and the collected data to the public domain, they weren't just releasing software. They were exposing every secret, every bribe, and every shadow transaction Julian and his investors had ever made. But I had no time for global consequences. I needed to find my mother. I looked at the terminal. Underneath the scrolling code, there was a small blinking sub-window titled Biological Signature Tracking. I slammed my hands onto the keyboard, my fingers moving with a desperate, instinctive speed. Julian had used a neural interrupter on her, a device that worked on a specific radio frequency. If I could find that frequency, I could find the device. And if I could find the device, I could find her. The signal was moving. It was fast, moving toward the private airfield 5 miles away. I didn't have a car. My SUV was gone, and Elena's team had vanished into the night. I ran back upstairs, my eyes landing on Julian's discarded tablet. I grabbed it, bypassed the security lock with a brute force script I'd written years ago for testing, and accessed the house's external cameras. I saw them. A black van was speeding away from the driveway. But more importantly, I saw a second car, a nondescript sedan, parked 2 houses down. It was Elena. She hadn't left. She was waiting for the dust to settle so she could scavenge the remains. I ran out into the night, waving my arms. Elena's car surged forward, her headlights blinding me. She slammed on the brakes inches from my knees. "They have the key, Mark," she yelled, leaning out the window. "Julian and that, whatever that man was, they're taking it to the terminal. If that upload finishes, my employers lose everything. And if my employers lose everything, I'm a dead woman. They have my mother." I climbed into the passenger seat before she could protest. "Drive. If we get there before the upload hits 100%, I can use the biometric override to kill the signal. But you have to get me into that van." Elena didn't argue. She threw the car into gear, the tires smoking as we roared toward the airfield. "Julian's a fool," she muttered, weaving through the late-night traffic. He thought he could play both sides. He offered the shareholder the same deal he offered us. He didn't realize the shareholder doesn't negotiate. They just absorb. "Who are they?" I asked. "The people who own the banks that own the countries," she said. "And you, Mark, built the one thing that could actually track their money. That's why Julian wanted 30%. He thought it was a seat at the table. He didn't realize he was just the menu." We reached the airfield as a small, sleek private jet began to taxi toward the runway. The black van was parked next to the hangar, its doors wide open. Elena didn't slow down. She drove straight through the chain-link fence, the metal screeching as it tore away. She rammed the side of the van, the impact throwing me against the dashboard. I didn't wait for the car to stop moving. I kicked my door open and rolled onto the tarmac. Julian was there, standing at the bottom of the jet's stairs. He looked disheveled, his expensive suit torn, his face pale with a terror I had never seen before. He was holding the master laptop in one hand and a remote in the other. Sarah was nowhere to be seen, likely already discarded. And there, slumped in the doorway of the jet, held by the man in the janitor's uniform, was my mother. "Mark, stay back!" Julian shrieked. He looked at the laptop screen. 99%. As soon as it hits 100, I'm gone. I'll have the leverage. I'll be the one they have to talk to. "It's not going to give you leverage, Julian," I shouted, stepping toward him. "The janitor isn't helping you. He's using your hardware to leak everything. You're not becoming a king. You're becoming the world's biggest target." Julian looked at the janitor, then back at the screen. The green text was still scrolling. "You're lying. You're just jealous. You couldn't handle the fact that I was better at this than you. I deserved a share of this company. I deserved everything." "You were my friend, Julian," I said, my voice low and steady. "I would have given you anything if you just asked. But you didn't want to share. You wanted to be me. And you're not me." The janitor looked at his watch. Then he looked at me. 100%, Mr. Sterling. The truth is out. The Aegis is no longer yours. It belongs to everyone now." He shoved my mother toward me. I caught her, pulling her into my arms, feeling her heart beating wildly against my chest. She was shaking, but she was alive. The janitor then turned to Julian. He didn't pull a gun. He just took the laptop from Julian's limp hands. "The shareholder thanks you for your service, Julian," the janitor said. "Your orders were to facilitate the transfer. You did so. But you were right about one thing. You did want a share of the company." The janitor reached into his pocket and pulled out a small gold-embossed coin. He pressed it into Julian's palm. "There is your share. Well, one single unit of the new currency Aegis just created by devaluing every other market on Earth. It's worth approximately nothing, just like you." The janitor stepped onto the jet, and the stairs began to retract. "Wait!" Julian screamed, clawing at the closing door. "You can't leave me here. Elena's people, the feds, they'll kill me." The jet's engines roared to life, the backblast throwing Julian across the tarmac. He sprawled onto the ground, the gold coin rolling away into the darkness. Elena stepped out of her car, her gun drawn, but she didn't fire. She just watched the jet lift off into the night sky. She looked at me, then at the broken man sobbing on the ground. "It's over," she said, her voice sounding exhausted. "The data is public. My employers are currently being raided by 3 different international task forces. There's no company left to fight for, Mark." I helped my mother into Elena's car. I looked back at Julian. He was sitting in the middle of the runway, clutching his head, realizing that the highly successful company he had tried so hard to steal was now a pile of digital ash. He had refused to follow orders, he had betrayed his only friend, and he had expected the world as his reward. He had finally gotten his share. He had 30% of a ghost. 6 months later, I sat in a small cafe in a country where nobody knew my name. The world was different now. The Aegis leak had triggered the greatest financial restructuring in human history. The shareholders were in hiding, and the people I had once feared were now the ones looking over their shoulders. My mother was safe, living in a quiet cottage by the sea. Vanguard Solutions was gone, liquidated to pay for the legal defense I eventually didn't need, thanks to the evidence the leak provided of my innocence. I opened my laptop, a simple, off-the-shelf model. I logged into a secure, encrypted forum. There was a single message waiting for me. "The system is stable, Mark. They're trying to build a new one, but the Glasshouse protocol you hid in the broadcast is preventing them from encrypting their data again. Transparency is the new order. You won." I closed the laptop and took a sip of my coffee. I didn't feel like a winner. I felt like a man who had finally finished a very long day at work. As I rose to leave, a man in a sharp suit sat down at the table next to mine. He didn't look at me, but he set a small leather briefcase on the chair between us. "Julian says hello," the man said softly. "He's in a very secure facility in Virginia. He spends most of his time telling the guards that he's actually the CEO of a billion-dollar company. He still thinks he's owed a dividend." I didn't look at him. "Tell him the dividend was paid in full. There's just one thing," the man continued. "The shareholder is gone, but the shares remain. We found a small pocket of the Aegis code that wasn't leaked, a piece that controls the global satellite backbone. Only one person has the biometric key to activate it." He pushed the briefcase toward me. "They're offering you 100% this time, Mark. No partners, no employees, just you." I looked at the briefcase, then out at the sun setting over the ocean. I thought about the boy who had started Vanguard in a garage, dreaming of changing the world. I thought about the man who had almost lost everything to a friend's greed. I picked up the briefcase, walked to the railing of the pier, and dropped it into the deep, dark water. "I'm retired," I said. I walked away, and for the first time in my life, I didn't take any orders from anyone, not even myself.